enable to live stream to the custom service. Okay. Okay, seems to have started, even the website says so. So, hello everybody, welcome to Blazor Day. Did I share with the sound? Probably not, so let me reshare again. Share sound. Share, all right. Welcome to .NET Zurich User Group session. Today we have a double take with Blazor Day. Well, we have a double take if our missing speaker appears. So Abdul, if you hear this, please come. And yeah, let's get started giving thanks to our sponsors. We have our gold sponsors offering solutions with WoW and for texture. Thank you so much. Our location, Impact Hub Zurich and the Stanford Group, and our partners, Azure Zurich User Group, which they are today, I think, doing the Zurich bootcamp in Bern. We have .NET Central, we have .NET Day Switzerland, and Trace Angular. Thank you so much for your support. Who are we? It's basically me, Paul, Michael, Nigel, Logan, Fabian, and Mark. What do? We organize events from developers to share knowledge, passion, to create excitement about technology, and also some networking included. At the end, we usually do a session. We usually stay and had beer and pizza, but that was back in 2019, but more about that in a moment. We have an upcoming event, which is this one, which happens this week on Thursday, thanks to improvisation and booking room challenges. That's what it is, and we're trying to make the most out of it. It's already announced. You can sign in. We will have free drinks. I don't know if pizza, but warm food, and yeah, it will be in person after like almost 2 years. At the moment, we are like 10 or 11. So if you are in Zurich, you would like to come, grab your seat. Probably we will have plenty for you. But we will not ensure about the catering because we just close it. It is about entity framework. It's also double take. So on one session, on one we will have Shay. Well, Shay will do the both sessions. And on one, you can ask him literally anything. And on the other, he will introduce an interesting topic about MPG SQL multiplexing, quite complex topic on entity framework performance. Yep. So if you're ready to dig into some internals of entity framework, or just ask anything regarding entity framework, database, or even .NET, just come. It's this Friday, sign there and see you in person. Apart from that, what can you do? Follow us on Twitter, .NET Zurich, join our meetup group, tell your peers, help us grow. You can propose at sessionize.com/.NET Zurich, or just take a look at our web. It hasn't changed too much in the last 5 or 6 years, maybe 7 or maybe more, but still there, it's still working. It's good. And let's come to today's agenda. We have today, well, we just did it, the .NET Zurich developers introduction. We had the Blazor unit testing, how to write unit tests for your Blazor components with Steven. Hi, Steven. And probably he will show some cuts, maybe, I don't know. And then if we find our lost speaker, we will have enterprise grade Blazor apps with .NET 6 with Abdul Rehman Aftab, sorry. And then we will set the streaming and you will have the opportunity to have a private conversation with our beloved speakers or speakers, that the missing one appears or not, right? So coming to the first speaker, we have Steven Giesel. He's a software engineer, super fun guy, loves cats, loves open source. He's recently doing more and more speaking engagements, and he's getting quite good at that. So it's a pleasure to listen to him. He likes to gain and share knowledge. As a fun topic, he still does not have a Twitter account, which I tell to him every time I talk to him, because the first thing I do when I talk to people is I try to open a Twitter conversation, but with him it's, well, simply not possible. But I can have very fine LinkedIn conversations, which honestly I really don't like the chat there, but it works. And you can find him at steven-giesel.com in LinkedIn already. About Abdul, I think he's still Abdul. Are you there? No. So our last speaker is Abdul Rehman Aftab. He's a principal software engineer at Atom, Square, MCT.NET, full stack, and Azure developer, and president at Code Movement. Probably he's very busy at this moment. This is his Twitter handle. If you want to tweet something to him and tell, hey, where are you? Feel free. That would be fun. And here is Abdul Rehman Aftab name. I even learned how to pronounce it properly. So come on, join us. That's it. We will go as stated to the first session, Blazor unit testing. And yeah, Steven, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I will just take over the screen, even though Zoom says, okay, so perfect. Thank you very much, though. I hope you can see my screen. I hope you can hear me. That is, we can. That was wonderful. Two conditions met. Yeah, Jose, I hoped you would lower the expectation bar and not make it high. So now I have to deliver. That's very unfortunate. Anyway, no, I'm just kidding. So exactly, today is Blazor Day, and it's cool that we have basically the enterprise, how to build a big app. You know, with Blazor, is Blazor ready for enterprise? And spoiler alert, I think it is since years. And of course, when you talk about enterprise apps, you also talk about unit testing. Unit testing is an integral part of your app, because if you want to refactor, you want to have a living documentation, unit testing is just, you know, one bit you have to have. And because it's Blazor, we will talk about Blazor unit testing, and especially about bUnit, which is the library when it comes down to unit testing, our beloved Blazor components. But also I will talk about ideas in unit testing in general. So this is not only about Blazor, it is to some parts a bit more generic. But first to me, I mean, Jose introduced me quite nice. I do not have Twitter. That is true, which is my unique selling point. I do think this is a good conversation opener, that people claim I should have Twitter. And I don't know why. But yeah, it is how it is. I'm a software engineer in Zurich, working for Zurich Engineering AG. And I do love Blazor since it was released. I do love .NET since years, not since it was released, because I was quite young when it was released. Funny enough, I started with C and C++ before I went over to C#. And yeah, even though those slides you can see here, they are written in HTML, CSS, and yeah, unfortunately also partially JavaScript. I do think I should maybe migrate to having Blazor presentations. This would be really, really cool. But I wrote my own blog completely in Blazor. According to GitHub, I have 0.1% JavaScript. So there is a bit of JavaScript involved. Hopefully with .NET 7 and the upcoming .NETs, it is less. It should be 0. That would be lovely. Yeah. So a small disclaimer before we go. I talk about Blazor and I talk about unit testing. So it is vital that you know at least what Blazor is, and that the word unit testing is not completely new to you. That would be a good precondition. If you don't know Blazor, that's quite fine, because you can see how cool Blazor is, how cool Blazor is, how easy it is to write components, and yeah, what a nice technology it is. So that you can take from my talk. Also, I will do live coding. So if you have questions, either write them in the chat or just unmute yourself, ask me questions. Because at the end, all the stuff I will show you, I do know. It's for you. So it's always cool if you ask questions, if you have input, comments, whatnot. That's always appreciated. Yeah.
So you take questions as they come.
Always.
Will you be reading the chat, or should I read them out loud for you?
Ping me. I tried to read the chat as well, but it was always appreciated.
I will ping you.
Spot me. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. That helps. Exactly. So what is bUnit and why do I introduce you to bUnit? What does it special? In very, very, very simple terms, bUnit is a testing library which enables us to unit test Blazor components. And the goal should be to have an easy setup to make it comprehensible, and whoever did end-to-end tests will know that they should be also stable. They shouldn't be flaky at all. So how this works is oversimplified. We have a component under test, or let's just Blazor component if you want to say so. We throw it against that beautiful library. The library renders it, of course, via Blazor pipeline. And on top, it offers a bunch of utility. This is oversimplified what the library offers us. Why this is necessary or important and which problems it tackles, I will show you in a second. And generally, it behaves like a Blazor server. Doesn't matter, but I just wanted to give you this information. So why do I show this? And this is easy. We have the original author of the library. It's Egil Hansen, a very delightful guy. I work with him quite a lot because of this project. And then personally me, I'm the core contributor to the library. Yes, it's over a year now. Yeah, kind of like that. I started with Egil together, and it is quite fun. So if you have always questions, discussion points, bugs, I will share the links at the end of this small talk. Just head over to the GitHub repository, file some issues, open some discussions. We are always open for new ideas, or we are delighted to just help you because we like that. So what does bUnit offer for you? And the first point is you can set up and define components using either C#. So what you would do is, for example, XUnit or NUnit, or, and this is the really, really cool thing, you can use the Razor syntax. So you write your components in Razor syntax and you also test them in Razor syntax. You stay in one world. That's very, very cool. How this works, I will show later in the live coding part. And then we have a semantic HTML comparer. The strong point here is semantic. So also here, I will show this later in the live coding, but we don't always want to have, strictly speaking, string equality because it doesn't help us all the time. We have semantic HTML comparer. That's really, really cool. Also, what we can do, we can emulate Blazor lifecycle events. So whoever, I guess a lot of you already wrote some Blazor components and they have some lifecycle events, like you can create them. They have an on-initialized and on-parameter set. They have a dispose. And all those events, they have to be triggered somehow. And you can't do this easily. And the reason is Blazor components don't know how to render themselves. They're just a dummy container. And the Blazor renderer takes them and renders them, creates markup. Therefore, we need something to trigger those lifecycle events, and bUnit exactly does that. Of course, what we can do is we can inspect the components. So if you render a Blazor component, we can see the markup. I will show you this also later. And we can trigger event handlers. I mean, what would be a component if you can't interact with it? So if you have a button, you click a button, something happens, then yeah, you want to test that to some degree. We can pass parameters. That makes obviously sense. Cascading values, services. We can also inject, we can mock them. And the cool thing is, if you come from the ASP.NET Core world, you will feel very familiar because this is the basic concept how ASP.NET Core does dependency injection. We just took the same approach. So whatever you do there, you can do with bUnit as well. One other thing is JS runtime. And JS runtime is also something we mock. The reason we don't provide anything is because we're not a browser. So we don't run JavaScript, or we mock JavaScript. And of course, we have authentication, authorization. We have a lot of helper utilities. So every new feature which is introduced in .NET or in Blazor with the newest .NET versions, we try to keep up the pace and have some kind of test double, stub, or mock. So it's super easy to interact with. And for me personally, the best thing is you can use the best practices from the C# world And everything feels like a regular unit test. You don't feel like, oh, wow, I'm interacting with a UI. It still feels like a C# test. And that is one of the main strong points of the library. And when I talk about what does bUnit offer, it's always super important to say what it doesn't offer. Where's the line where you shouldn't take it, or where it doesn't solve your problem? And foremost, it's important to know it's not a general purpose testing framework. Even though it sounds like XUnit or NUnit or MS Test, it's not in the same range of those. It's only meant for Blazor components. So you should not write your EF core application and then use bUnit for unit testing stuff there. You can make that work. I don't want to say, yeah, you can't do it, but I would advise strongly against that. Also, it is not run in a browser. This is not a headless Chrome. This is not any browser engine in the background interpreting your code. This is important because with that, you also have to know it does not run JavaScript. And this makes sense because we want to have unit tests. If you talk about JavaScript and Blazor, this is integration. You have integration points. We will not test this with bUnit. What we can test, on the other hand, is that some JavaScript functions got called with, for example, specific parameters. That for sure is possible with bUnit, and this is what you should do. Another question one could ask is, why don't I use Selenium or Playwright? And the easy answer is they're slow. And when we're slow, I mean not only in the execution time, but they're also slow to build, in comparison, of course, to unit testing, in comparison to bUnit. They seem to be a bit more flaky. They are harder to maintain. And you don't want to have singular atomic behavioral units tested with Playwright or Selenium. The setup is quite hard. They're literally meant for end-to-end tests. So you can make some black box or white box testing. This is totally fine. Or smoke testing is also good, but you should not go into such details that, okay, I click a button and then this business logic kicks in and afterwards this kicks in. This is not what you should do. Or under normal circumstances, I'm not the authority when it comes down to testing. So please take all what I say with a grain of salt. Okay, with the theoretical part behind us, I hope we could give you a bit of a frame where all this is going in the next, let's say, 20, 40 minutes. Let's come to the cool parts and what is a bit special about bUnit and what I earlier meant with Razor component tests. So this one is a normal .NET 6 XUnit template. So if you just go to your console, write .NET new, and then you make an XUnit test, then roughly you have this set up. This is also good and fine. So for example, here, .NET 6, we have the project SDK, which is Microsoft.NET.SDK. And now the cool part. What happens if I add bUnit? Or what happens if I add bUnit and I want to have the Razor syntax for unit testing? And this is super, super trivial. We only have to do two things. First, we have to include the library. I mean, that makes sense. It's an external dependency. It doesn't come with Microsoft, or it doesn't come with the SDK itself. We are working on that, but don't expect something in the next minutes. So it's still hosted on NuGet. And then there's a cool trick you can do. You can just say in your project SDK .razor, and what it does is basically telling the compiler, hey, this is a Razor library. We need this because if you write Razor components, we need someone translating this into plain old C# code. And if you just put this .razor inside, you're just telling exactly that. And then the whole .NET build chain triggers, and you have perfectly nice Razor unit tests, which you can see in a minute in Visual Studio. You can run them. You can run them in .NET Test, but there's a small disadvantage. This unfortunately doesn't really work with Rider. Rider does not see unit tests or the test coverage. It doesn't see them anymore if you say this is a Razor component library. I at some point thought about filing there an issue, but I don't know if they would see it as an issue. But anyway, this is just one out of two ways you can still write plain old C# XUnit tests. So yeah. Speaking of XUnit, so I use XUnit. You can use whatever you want. You can use MS-test, NUnit, XUnit, or yeah, I don't know what's other major testing frameworks out there. I personally love XUnit and the way it does things. Also, how it tries to enforce your certain style. Super cool for me. So I will do XUnit. I will keep my examples anyway simple. Feel free to use whatever you want. We don't enforce anything, basically. Okay, with that said, let's go to my Visual Studio. And the first thing, when you come in contact with Blazor, I do think is the counterexample. And I do think every one of you knows the counterexample. But anyway, I want to show this. So here you have this page, you have a counter. And if you click that button, then here this number increases by 1. Super trivial. And the code is also super trivial. You have this current count here, what we saw earlier. We have a button, we have an on-click event. Okay, this is the part I guess everyone is a bit familiar with. Let's just stop this for now. And let's select the Test Explorer here and make this window a bit bigger so you see a bit more. Okay, how can we write a unit test? First, I have some usings here on the top side. So I use bUnit because it's the library I use. Well, I basically present to you. We have XUnit as my unit testing framework. And this using is basically my component. This is where the counter lives. And as you can see, I use Razor syntax. This is all Razor syntax. Also here, this add code, inherits. This is everything is Razor syntax. There's no plain old C# sounds wrong, but you know what I mean. It's not the normal way you would write a unit test. Inherits, as you can see, bUnit test context. This class brings us basically all the utility we need. All the magic, or 99% of the magic, happens inside here. There are multiple ways. I would always advise just inherit from test context if you can. It's just easier to read afterwards. And yeah, you can also always use new test context and work with the new test context, but I will show you this way. I just inherit from test context and then we'll use test context. So you can see there are a lot of methods. How do we test this bit here? And the first thing I want to show you is how would we test this without bUnit? And I want to show this to you because then you see the need for this library in the first place. So every component in Blazor is just a plain old class. So if I just say, okay, I have my counter here, which is a new counter, then this is perfectly valid. So this counter here is the right side. Now there's my counter and I press dot. And you can see, there's not much. We have equals, get hash code, get type, and toString, which are basically inherited from object. And then we have extension method, should be element reference to. Also, it's from a library. It's nothing you really can interact with. And the only public method you have here is set parameters async. Just an explanation what set parameters async is. If you have a component and your component owns another Blazor component, they have to have a means of putting parameters to one to each other. And this is how they communicate. So this is just a contract between components to pass parameters around. And as you can see, that is not enough. So just with those two methods, I can't do much. And this is exactly what I explained earlier. Components or Blazor components, they don't have any means to render themselves. They're just dump data container. And you need someone to do something with the data container. And this is exactly where the unit comes in. Now, what do we do now? We don't call new counter. We saw this doesn't bring us anywhere. And the next problem with new counters is just the constructor. So yes, we have some bytes allocated on the heap, but basically that's all. But we all know there are certain events behind a Blazor component. For example, the on initialized async. Just imagine you have a component on initialized async, you go to the database, you go to the web API. And those things we have to somehow trigger. And how do we trigger them? Yes, exactly, with bUnit. So there's a beautiful method called render, and this is exactly what it does. It renders our component. And here, another cool thing, the Razor syntax allows us so-called to do render fragments. So instead of some weird notation, I can just write plain old HTML text inside here. And this works. Maybe not like that, that works better. Visual Studio, thank you very much. And this is our first, this is just how we render a component, how we create a component and how we render it the first time. So it's not only called render, it really does that. Now, my notation normally is I call my variables cut for component under test. I know a lot of guys use system under test in their unit tests. I prefer the CUT for component under test. Please feel free to call it whatever you want. And this is our arrange part. So typically when you make unit tests, you have an arrange, you have an act, and you have an assert part. So the arrange part is basically done. The arrange part means we have now a means to interact with our Blazor component via bUnit, and bUnit goes to the Blazor render pipeline. A typical unit test for this beautiful increment counter or counter example would be clicking on button increases counter by one. And here's the next thing why we need bUnit. So even though we have now our component under test, we need a means to toggle or trigger that button. And this button, in theory, if you want to say so, is private to the outside world. And this is where bUnit comes in. And whoever of you did already some, let's say, end-to-end tests, UI tests with Playwright, with Jasmine, with Mocha or whatnot, you will be very familiar with what I do right now. We have a method so-called find. And I know it's a very small, but the find will take a string. And the parameter name of the string is CSS selector. And this is how you do it with every major UI testing framework. So to select some HTML references inside your code, you normally take CSS selectors. So in my example, I could take the button. There's only one button, so this is totally valid. I don't know why Visual Studio always wraps that line. Anyway, I would encourage you try to be specific, maybe not too specific. You want to be maintainable. So button is good and nice for my example, but just imagine I would add another button here. If I add another button, it will always take the first one. If I use proper HTML syntax, then it also would work. That's why I gave my button a nice ID. And we can use this ID. It's just a CSS selector. So what I can do is I can say, take this increment button. And then we have a button. This is my button. And what I also want to show you is the type. It's called iElement. So let me just do this. I hope you can see this. The iElement type comes from the AngleSharp library. I guess whoever worked with HTML parsing in C# is very aware of that library. It's basically you can throw arbitrary markup to this library, and AngleSharp gives you strongly typed C# objects you can interact with. So we have, for example, here now a button. And with this button, we can do whatever we want. And what we want to do in this example is we want to click it. So let's just click it. And this is exactly how the method is called. We can call click. And then what it does is literally calling increment counter. Super straightforward, super easy. And now we can use the same thing with this find to get this p element. And what we want to do is we want to have our p element. I can say component under test, find my p element. Now we only have one, so it will be always this one. That's perfect. And now we can assert things. You can use your regular assertion library, or you can use what bUnit offers you. And there's a special one. There's so-called markup matches method. And this is a special one. First, you can do again inline HTML, which is super convenient, at least in my opinion. So, and this is done and closed. And this will offer you a lot of utility. I will show you in a few seconds why this is a very, very, very important function. But let's first, I hope you can see this here is my test window. I will just execute this test. Just that you know that this one gets green if I did everything right. So it compiles, that's beautiful. Do I have a still, wait, it can't compile because everything is open in the background. That's not so great. If I leave everything open, exactly. So this is green. And you can also see, I hope you can see, the duration time is 500 milliseconds. This is fast because I can also show you something else. I just copy paste that test and just call it 2. I know it's exactly the same test. Doesn't matter for now. What I want to show you is that a single test is executed very fast. These 500 milliseconds is basically XUnit spinning up some stuff. And you can see here, the second test runs only 10 milliseconds. And if you just imagine how long an end-to-end test with playwrights, a headless Chrome takes, then this is just so much faster. And yeah, really cool feature. Okay, now I talked about this markup matches thingy here. And why is this important? Now, I will give you a few examples. Let's start with, I will just add some arbitrary spaces here. I will just add some arbitrary spaces here. I mean, this is not valid anymore, sorry. Let's make at least a valid HTML. I do not know why this is valid, by the way. The HTML specification says, totally fine, go for it. Never saw it. If you want to piss off your colleagues, just do this arbitrary spacing somewhere. They like that. Okay. Now, the question is, does that unit test pass or does that unit test fail? And I will just run it because it just has to compile it anyway. And it's easy, it will pass. And the simple reason it will pass is white spaces do not matter. So if you go into the HTML, here you can see it's green. If you go into the HTML specification, white spaces don't matter. So it doesn't matter that this thing is here. And I mean, this is a very artificial example I did, but what can be important is there are people who prefer, for example, this style. And still it would match. Most likely you will have a div or so around, but you get the idea. This is still the same markup. And as long as it's the same markup, everything is fine. Now, another example, why this is an important method. We want to style our P elements. We do this normally with classes. Let's say I want to have a bold text and I want to have, I don't know, uppercase. I make this thing now up. These classes don't exist in real world. I just made them up. So what happens if I execute them now? Are they passing? Is this the same? Is this the same markup? Let's see. And no, of course not. Now we have classes. We have to provide them. Classes are an integral part of the markup. And there are now two things I want to show you. First, you can say class, yeah, and I do it this way. So you can see I totally do it the opposite direction. I have uppercase here as the first class and bold text as the second. But on my production code, I have bold text as the first class and uppercase on the second. Now, this will pass. The reason is simple. Your browser basically doesn't care. It is the same if you, so the ordering of classes doesn't matter. If you ever wondered what happens if this one has, for example, a very slim text and this has a bold text, I encourage you just try it out. As a hint, it's just your CSS file is important. Whatever is parsed first is applied first. So it basically comes down to your CSS file. That's why markup matches is important. So as long as the markup, according to the HTML specification, is the same, these tests will pass. There are also other ways to assert this stuff. And the second way I want to show you right now. So this one, we know it works. But what we also can do is, because this is the AngularSharp library, we can use all the stuff AngularSharp offers for us and utilize this. And one of the things you can use is the so-called text content. So the text content of a node is literally, if you want to say so, the inner HTML. In my example, it would be current count 1. So let's take that. Let's take that. This is my text content. Just put this in a nice variable. It's not strictly necessary. And then you can use your as equal that. You see, I never use the default of XUnit, and then it's expected first. And then you can totally use your assertion library of choice. So if you're a super fan of fluent assertions, go for it. If you're a fan of shouldly, go for it. If you use assert equal, go for it. That's no problem. One of the main advantages text content has is you are not testing if this is a P element or not. For me personally, this is important. I tend to do the second style, to go for the inner HTML, because it gives me the opportunity to change that. So if this is not a P element anymore, I want to have something else, then the text stays the same. Or yeah, you get the idea. Normally you can, what you can do is near current count, then this one gives you totally freedom, whatever you want. And this is perfect. Try to avoid structural tests as much as you can. Sometimes they are part of your business logic, and that is totally fair, totally fine to do so. But in general, try to avoid testing your structure. Always test your behavior. And that is not only for Blazor important. This is a tip I can give you generally. In every unit test you do, if you test structure, you have a problem, because once your structure changes, your unit test becomes invalid or partially even not compilable anymore. And I mean, this is why you have a unit test, to verify afterwards if everything works. And if you have to change both sides of the equation, yeah, have fun. Of course, with those small examples here, everything is fine. You can do this empirically, no big issue at all. But when it comes down to enterprise applications, yeah, you will go on thin ice. Okay, okay. Next thing I want to show you, small refactoring of the right side. Business, yeah, let's call it business, or some stakeholder likes to have the initial count, like the initial count right now is always 0. It's just a default of an integer. But we want to say, hey, it should be possible that the initial counter can be set freely. And in Blazor, you would do this via parameter. And to refactor this quickly into a nice parameter, we do a public property, we make a get set, and we are almost done. So let's take this here, let's take that there. And of course, we also should take it here, because this is not valid anymore. Okay. And we want to have this exactly. How can we write a test now? I can write a test which says when initial state is 5. So I want to set my current counter. I even, wait, there's a typo. That's not beautiful. So that's better. When the initial state is 5 and I click on, I increment and I increment, then the current count is 6. And this is super, super easy with this so-called render fragments or inline render fragments. I do not know the term, to be honest. I mean, this is called render fragment, but with this notation, I guess it's called inline render fragment. We, and you can see, get even IntelliSense here. I just press enter and I can set my current count to 5. I can set objects, I can set my DTO, whatever I want. I can also wrap this with cascading parameters. This is super easy and super readable. This is why this Razor syntax is so good, because you stay mentally also in the same world as your production code. You don't have to shift around. That is something personally for me very, very nice. So let's quickly finish that unit test. We have a 5 here. We click once this button, and then of course, let's put this away, this markup matches. I wanted to work now with the text content, and of course my text content has to be 6. That's, I guess, straightforward. If my math is not wrong and 5 + 1 is still 6, then this test passes. If not, then that's on me. Let's compile that, and woo, green. Who had thought that? Okay, that is really, really cool. And this gives you a rough idea where all of this is going. And I just want to show you 1 or 2 more cool examples. Please, if you have any questions, always let me know. Just, jump into the conversation. Say, Stephen, shut that up. Please, I have a question. If not, I will continue with something I do think it's very, very common: third-party libraries. Now, third-party libraries are cool. They are, yeah, I don't think anyone would write everything from scratch. I don't think this exists. So we have people writing some components. Telerik would be, for example, very, very famous third-party library provider for Blazor components. But if you use those things, you also inherit their code. But that doesn't mean you want to test their code, because it's not your code. It's not even your responsibility in the first place. And furthermore, if they change, you have to change your unit tests. So you go down a slippery slope if you also test third-party behavior. Again, that doesn't only apply to Blazor. This applies basically to C# or unit testing in general. Now, when we have this third-party library here, and we don't want to have that because that could rely on JavaScript. Maybe we need some proper setup, as it is with this typical JavaScript Blazor components. Then we have 2 options. We can either stub it or we can mock it. And I know those terms oftentimes they're used interchangeably. But stubbing and mocking is not the same. A stub is basically, if you want to say so, an empty component. So I replace my third-party library component, so it's still compilable, but it has no behavior. If I have a mock, I have test behavior. So I, in my test, define the behavior. And also bUnit offers us those 2 possibilities. And this is really, really important. So let's make a dump test, just so that you know how it works. Let's say my component, the test I will write, my component should not have this third-party library component. So when rendering, no third-party library available or enabled, or findable, whatever. Okay, this component, let's put this away. At least the structure should be the same. It's my arrange. This component, I hope you can see it, is called component with third-party library. And I can do this here again, component with, did I write third as a number? No, I was not lazy. Party library. Okay, this works. So now we have our component under test. And what we also can do is we can say, oops, there was Visual Studio. I can say, find a component. I can say, find this component here. That's totally what we can do. And then we could interact with this third-party library. Of course, I don't want to do this. What I want to do is, and this is almost like find component, this component. So I can ask, do I have this component somehow, somewhere in the markup here? And what I basically want is to say, no, I don't want to have this for now. Okay, this test for sure will fail because this is part of it. And what I want to show you is here, by the way, let's go.
Stephen.
Yes.
Have a question.
Yes.
What if there is a process on the rendering, like, I don't know, doing some counting up to 5 or maybe accessing web service or graphical endpoint and getting some data, and then when it has the data, it renders. So we have to wait. Usually we have these in other UI testing frameworks. Right?
We have this also. I will show you this afterwards if you want.
Okay. That was too ahead.
That's a good point. I will make this quick so I don't waste too much time. The idea is simple. So here, this test will for sure fail. The reason is this is integral part of our markup. And you can also check the markup. So there's even a property called markup. So if you want to see the rendered HTML, you can do that. And you can see my assertion here fails. I say this component shouldn't be part of my render tree, but it is. And there's a super simple one-liner to achieve exactly a green test. And we call this thing component factories. So we have multiple component factories, which basically build up your render tree. But what we can say is, hey, add please a stub. And then I can say add a stub for this component. Okay, and this makes my test pass. That's all. What bUnit does is literally inserts empty markup on every occurrence of whatever I pass in here, in this term, third-party library component. Super trivial, super easy. You can see works perfectly. Another thing I want to show before I come to Jose, your point, because this is also something I guess a lot of people are, or yeah, you encounter this very frequently. So let's make this quick. You can create mocks. So replacements, if you want to say so. And the only thing you have to do is, so my component, it has to derive from iComponent. And this has nothing to do with how bUnit works. This has something to do with how Blazor works. So every component you create always derives from iComponent. That's the minimal thing they do. Normally, what they also do is derive from component base, and component base then offers you this utility, this lifecycle events like on render, on after render, on initialize, on perimeter set, And what we can do is we can basically replace components. And I do this test here that I say, let's leave this for here. I want to show you that everything works. I will check, does my render tree have this component? Sorry. And of course, now it fails for obvious reasons, because it's not part of my render tree. I just created here a class which is used nowhere. So let's make this test. This component. Sorry, as a fault. I was surprised as you were. But my own test setup failed me. So this, of course, now, because it's exactly this fails. And it's super simple. We can say add, and then we have the component we want to replace. And then as a second parameter, the component we replace with. That would be that. And now every occurrence of third-party library component in our DOM, if you want to say so, is replaced by my component. And this can be very important if you want to, for example, as .NET 6 feature was arrow boundaries. And you want to have an easy setup with exceptions, and you don't want to have like 20 lines of code just to set up your exception. Then you can just make an easy replacement, let this throw on, for example, on initialized or in this constructor, and you can easily test your error boundaries. So this is done. Okay, now let's come to Jose, your example. I will artificially create this in the sense of I have here an hello world service. And this hello world service is now still synchronous. That's not what we want. We want to have an async service. And we want to have this async. So, I mean, this one doesn't really matter. For convenience reason, I will just make it now. So get hello world async. This is then task from result. We will not use it. Just don't worry. Task from result. We will set this up. Oh, you know what? No, we don't set this up. We don't set this up. We will write a quick real function. We will use the task delay of 500 milliseconds, should be fair enough. And then we return hello dear world. Done. Okay, so this could be any async API you use. That could be an API request, which takes a bit of time. So yeah, if 500 milliseconds or not is debatable, hopefully not, but you get the idea. Now we have a component with a service. You can see here we have an inject, and basically what it does is we have the service, and now we need an await because it doesn't do any more of this stuff. And we want to have this here async. So, yeah, good. It doesn't work, of course, that way because I can't just push that like that. So sorry, just refactoring this function really quickly. for Jose's example, we have here private async task greet, where we take our hello world service, wait hello world service, then we have this get hello async, and we put this into our greeting example. So greeting equals, and yeah, greet. That is perfect. Okay, so when I click on the button, what happens is I have to wait 500 milliseconds, and then in my H3, this hello world will pop up. Now, how do we write a test for that? And I will do it the wrong way first. Let's do it the wrong way first. So just async test. I have my component under test, and I still use the render function without any problem. So what I can do here is render, and then I have my component with service. Done. Nah, not completely. Now, anyway, I will say, okay, we have to find this H3, and we want to have this text content. This is my assert. We want to have this text content, and this text content should be, as the service said, hello dear world. I hope yeah. Hello dear world, assert that. Okay, that looks good. Here, now what is missing is not that equal. What is missing is the act. The act is also simple. We will find a button and we will click that button. And as you can see, this is a synchronous operation. This is not async. There is an async overload, which it's not the default for various reasons, because normally your test should be synchronous as possible. And this is mainly due to the reason because also your Blazor renderer is synchronous as possible. This is how Blazor just works. Now, this test will fail, and it will fail not for the reason you think, not because I didn't await something. The reason is I did not add this service to my IOC container. There's a dependency injection, and this will also cannot provide value for hello world service. So what we have to do is we need this service. And normally you would work with mocks, but I will do now a new hello world service. Hello world service. Now I have my instance, and then I have the service container, services. And I can say add scoped. This is how you would register services in any ASP.NET application. So this is nothing new. So I have this, and I will add my service here. So this. And this is an extension method I didn't explicitly import, and maybe I should write it correctly, and everything is fine. Now, does it work now? No. The error message is gone, but that's not all, because we wait 500 milliseconds and we can see this text content is empty. So let's make the test, and we can see, oops, I hope you can see that. I will make this a bit bigger here. So the failure is expected hello dear world, but actually there's nothing. And this is really because re-render the first time, and every time Blazor encounters an asynchronous method, it just basically drops out. So you do not await async stuff. And there we have some utility, and there's a lot of utility. And the most obvious thing would be wait for state, wait for assertion, wait for element. This is these three we offer. We could say wait for the state that, and this is a lambda function we can just pass, that basically this content is not empty. You can also directly say text content has to be hello dear world. So, and then we are good to go. And this function will by default wait 1 second. If in this 1 second nothing happens, then it throws an exception and your test will fail. Internally, basically every time the Blazor renderer tells bUnit, hey, your markup got updated, bUnit will literally evaluate this function. And if it passes, it will just drop out and will continue your flow. And as you can see, after 1.2 seconds, so because of the wait time, this test gets green. Jose, does that answer your question simplistically?
I think so.
Exactly. That's perfect. We can do this the same with events. We can do the same with elements or assertions.
But we don't have an auto wait, like for example, play right.
No. What you can do is you can do stuff like that. So click async. That is a valuable option if you want to do so. But I have to provide some parameter here. New. Does it do that? Can I just make the easy one because I'm lazy? This works in a lot of cases, but not in all. So if you not await something, or I see also people doing in event handlers, at least doing this async void, then of course this will not work, because if you have async void, there is no way of awaiting this properly. So still you are in need of something like wait for state. But this would be one way. I personally prefer this way. So because it keeps my code readable, there is no asynchronous stuff going on. But this is just personal preference. It's basically up to you. That said, are there any other questions? I see in the chat there's a question. Coding it wrong for, this is my paradigm. I get paid by the hour. So if I make it right the first time, that's not good for me. I'm just kidding. Anyway, if you have any questions, so how, for example, how to set up JavaScript, how to assert certain JavaScript functions, I can advise you, I can show you this real quick here. I can make it a bit bigger. There's a bUnit repository on GitHub. It's bUnit -dev/bUnit. The beautiful documentation on bUnit.dev. And I also have a starter tutorial on my own blog where I very simplistic go through some of the scenarios I showed here. Again, just in a written form with some pictures, and you get the idea. So if you have any questions, just head over there, ask some questions. If you want to have new features or you encounter a bug, that is always very appreciated if you just file one, because that helps us, it helps the library, and for sure, it also helps other users. We try to be very responsive in also in fixing. So not only in reporting back, hey, you're right, that's a bug, but we try to be swift when it comes down to terminating those bugs. That said, I do think this is exactly my time limit. This is exactly what I planned. And if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much. I hope I could give you a small introduction to bUnit, why it is necessary, and why it is super cool. Thank you very much. And then I would hand over, if there are no questions. Oh, wait, I will dance.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now it's a moment, gentlemen. Pascal, I think you raised the hand first. Oh, no, that was like an applause, I think.
Thank you. Gives me a moment to drink something that's also very good.
Yeah, it really helps. Where is this project going? So what features do you plan to build next? Do you have any roadmap?
Yeah, so that's funny because Giesel and we have a meeting on Friday when it comes down to version 2.0. So we try to be very close to semantic versioning. So there are, if you have bUnit 1.0 and you upgrade to the current version 1.7, there's no breaking change for you. So you can always upgrade without any problem. And right now we tackle some problems. So what we did in the last weeks is, imagine you go from one page to another in Blazor. What Blazor does for you is it disposes your component. This is what we built recently. Right now, we want to try to make the library a bit not smaller, faster. So we introduce benchmarking internally. That's not really meant it's not for public usage. That's not so great. And we try to come up with some features for version 2.0. Also, most likely we will drop .NET Standard and .NET 5 because they're out of support. So we are talking about end of the year. And we want to revisit some of the API decisions to make it a bit slimmer, more intuitive to use. And then we will see which features we want to tackle. it's a bit up to the API design. Yeah, that's what we have planned. Not really a lot of concrete stuff.
Yeah, but it's cool. I mean, this project at the end is done in your free time, so thanks for thanks for building that as well.
Sure, it's a lot of fun, and also it's really cool because the Blazor team itself is oftentimes very responsive when it comes down to bugs or to issues or to clarify things. They're nice guys.
Are they using it?
That's a good question. If they're internally using it, I don't think so. To be honest, that's really cool. I don't know why, but I don't think they use it.
I have to check. That Angle Sharp renderer is using it, but officially it's only this project Angle Sharp renderer.
Yeah, to some certain extent, what the Blazor team is using is Selenium. They are using Selenium.
No, not even Playwright. Come on.
I mean, maybe they did this now, but I can tell you, like over a year ago, or almost 2 years ago, it was still Selenium. If you just go to the ASP.NET Core repository, you can see what they're building there, and there was Selenium. But maybe they changed it. I mean, they have an official Playwright.NET port, which I tried it. I fiddled around a bit with it. It is stable. You can use it. It's totally fine. The API is nice. I don't know.
The official page is bUnit -dep, right? In GitHub. The one.
Yeah, exactly. Wait.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is the organization.
So to all the attendees, please go there, check it out, and give it a star. Come on.
Yay.
Don't be shy. I just did that. Sorry for not doing that before, Steven.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, so you have discussions here. Normally, if you have problems, maybe you can find it here, then issues, file whatever you want. We try to be as responsive as possible. Yeah, that said, if there are no further questions now, then thank you very much, though. And I would hand over back to you, Rosse, if this is fine.
Steven?
Yeah.
I just have a short question. You work at Zurich, is that correct? In
yes.
Zurich. Okay, so that you're quite close to us. So we're starting to migrate our web form solution to Blazor. And we also discovered the same issues as you discovered with bUnit in the old UI testing framework. So we did something quite similar for the web forms world, but now we have to find a solution for that, and that's bUnit quite perfect. So maybe I will call you just to visit us over the railways, because we also in Zurich and Bern, and we are M&S. So yeah, maybe we can have a lunch once and discuss that further. So, but the question is now: is that correct? That the main purpose is to interact with the UI without the JavaScript and without all the other UI stuff.
Yes.
So did you never have the issue to have some of the JavaScript, especially because, you know, the new place is much more closer to the JavaScript world, and the whole, maybe you need some interaction of the JavaScript in the JS interoperability. So was there never a problem with that?
I mean, I do not know. Jose, tell me if I have time or not to answer this question, or how much in detail I should answer this question.
Yes, you have 1 hour more time.
Oh, so perfect. That is. Get yourself some coffee. Go. Okay, so the thing.
But really, we are good. But yes, I think.
Okay. It's good. Perfect. Exactly. So the reason why I always emphasize on unit testing is because this is exactly what we want to do. So you want to have isolation. You don't want to do JavaScript. And if you have JavaScript like this, you have here an await JS runtime, and you invoke something. And from a Blazor point of view, if you have like these two worlds or two actors, if you want to say so, you don't really care what JavaScript does. From your point of view, you might throw something into the JavaScript pipeline, if you want to say so, and you expect something which they return, or maybe they even don't return anything. And this, for sure, we can do with bUnit. So let's grab that. And as you can see, I have here this component with JS runtime. Let's render that component. Component with JS runtime. And we offer, we can make it easy. And we don't need this. What we offer is multiple things. So if you just type in base, so you know it comes from our test context, we have a JS interop here, JS interop. And here there are multiple things. For example, setup. And setup does exactly what you think. If I have an invoke async, I can say, hey, set up exactly that call. And my result in this case is a string. And then I can just pass in whatever I would call from Blazor. So I can say this is get hello world, and my argument is world. And then I can say, what is the result? So in this case, it would be a string. And I can say, hello world again, or so. I don't know, I'm not so creative as you can see. So then we are done. We're basically done, because when bUnit encounters, so we have our own JS runtime. We have our own double of that. And when we encounter you're calling something, then you can use these setup methods. But I can also make it super simplistic for you, because sometimes you forget that you have JavaScript. Let's just run this function. And this function, of course, will fail, but it will fail with a very, very delightful error message. So let's call that and that up. Oh, come on. Oh, come on, laptop. I know. So it runs the test and it fails the test. And as you can see, bUnit tells you, hey, you called the JavaScript function, but you didn't set it up properly. And it even gives you options how to do so. So this is just something which is very cool. So if you forget, it's not like, oh God, what did I forget? bUnit tells you. So, and if you set this up, so now my return value is hello world again, I can basically write my test. So as you can see, it's all of my examples right now. I always use an H3, which I greet, and I can do that. So my H3 would be find now my H3, get me the text content. And then we can assert that hello world again is text content of my H3. Assert equal and my H3. Okay, this test will pass. And this is how you set up JS runtime. You can also tell bUnit, like in every mocking framework, if you want to say so. You see, it passes. You can tell bUnit, should I be strict, which is the default? So you have those modes. Should I be strict or should I be loose? Loose would mean return the default of whatever type I encounter. Of course, every reference type would be null and every value type would be the default of that value type. And for strict, it throws you the exception. And from a unit testing point of view, this is totally enough. You don't care what your JavaScript does. If you want to test your JavaScript, then yes, you have to have some Jasmine set up or just set up or Mocha. That there's so many JavaScript testing frameworks, I can't count them. So that's up to you. But from your point of view, from the Blazor point of view, you just mock everything away. You don't care. Does it answer your question?
Yes, that's a really nice and surprisingly easy implementation. Also, the exception or the help text by bUnit is quite nice. Thanks. That's
perfect. That. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. And if you have any questions, just hit me up with a message, either LinkedIn or yeah.
Yeah, I will. Perfect.
Okay. Then, if there are not other questions, I would hand back to
Maybe Stephen. Yeah, I have the opportunity to ask somebody, because that's not. I think there are not that much Blazor guys currently in Switzerland. So the community is quite young. So, but well, okay, maybe the question is a bit crazy. But what is the worst thing you saw in Blazor till now? The really baddest, the biggest anti-pattern you saw till now?
Anti-pattern. I mean, there are smaller anti-patterns you can do, which, one thing I saw is, but it wasn't really Blazor related. This was like how the setup was done. So there was basically a bit like CQRS, you had an event, but every event was, so you had let's say a bunch of 100 events, but every event was pushed one by one. And every event basically translated or was translated into one column of a table. And so you had 5,050 render cycles, even though you needed only one. That was the worst I could see, which surprisingly only took a few seconds. And we optimized this with should render, and it took only a few milliseconds.
Okay.
That was funny, yeah. But besides that, as you said, it's not so old. It's not so. I don't want to say it's not mature because this is not true. For me, Blazor is very much mature. Also, Microsoft is still pushing a lot of stuff. Tries to make it as stable as possible. Is working on it, so it's not like Silverlight. Mainly also because it's open source.
Yeah,
and
I think so. Yeah. The reason why I asked this question is I see now how the people are struggling to make the transition from the old world, from a linear world to Blazor. And there are some kinds, for example, one pattern I saw or idea is to use the ref keyword for doing the same as in web forms with the ID to reference the component, but the complete model is different. So that's for learning Blazor from another older world, it's not that easy. So that's the reason why I asked. But
yeah. I mean, there are valid use cases for the ref keyword. My best example is always if you build your own model dialog, you have to have any means of opening that dialog, and this is normally done by ref, and then you have instant methods. But I can also see that you can abuse it. You can abuse it quite easily because of that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, probably we have to meet once, but
sure.
Especially also if we have more experience with that and have did some of those handy-patches and learned from them.
Sure. Please just hit me up. I'm always in for that. This is very cool to do and to see that especially in Switzerland, that companies start to adopt Blazor. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think you don't have that much options because of the life cycle of web forms will end in a few years. ASP.NET MVC is not a dead horse, but
you don't know where it's going.
On an older horse that you can go on a younger one, so you don't have that much choice.
Yeah, and from my point of view, I could consult multiple companies, which, for example, used MVC or web forms, and they went to Blazor, and they really, really loved it because they were basically all backend developers, so they could kind of stay in that world. Of course, they didn't have the biggest enterprise application in the world, so everything was fine. But for them, it was super easy to build an application, or even to migrate the application, because you just can take your business logic, your domain logic, and just transfer one-to-one. Super easy, super cool.
So with this comment and with Roding, I don't know if you're done with the response. I assume that composability is still not in there, so you cannot build different pieces and deploy these pieces of a Blazor application on demand.
Yes, that's unfortunately right. Until now, they have it on the agenda for .NET 7. It is, according to the GitHub issue, still open, so this might or might not come.
What about the speed and performance? There has been an increase, but I don't know now if a Blazor application is compiled natively or it's still interpreted in the browser.
You can do both. So you can use just a JIT, which let's say for the majority of applications is good enough. And you can have this ahead of time. Ahead of time, in a sense, means we're talking here about Blazor client. So because the Blazor server is trivial, Blazor server is just a signal R stream, and it depends on your server. And
this is client only.
Exactly. So when you have the client and you do ahead of time, your package is bigger. So your initial load is heavier. This is something you have to consider. But because it's already WebAssembly, it is faster. Now, how fast is WebAssembly compared to JavaScript? It's not that much faster, because a lot of browsers are taking the same or almost the same pipeline. So it is a bit faster, but it's also not like I don't know, it's just some numbers out of my head, like factor 5 or 10 faster. That's not the case. It's just a bit faster.
Still good.
Yeah.
I think it will skyrocket with composability.
I do think so too. Plus, the Mono team already introduced native multi-threading in for Mono in Wasm. So there's a high chance that you can really use multi-threading in the Blazor client application. That might be very cool if you have some background tasks. You could use it. You can use it for computational heavy tasks if you want. So let's see where this is going. It's a cool road.
Yeah, I can see a lot of Blazor apps suddenly will have Bitcoin mining behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, yes, that's true. You can also mine Bitcoins. That's true.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Good. So if we don't have any more questions, we will stop the streaming.
Perfect.